Yes. Yes.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the operational budget meeting for 2023-2024 budget year. This sounds really funny. This afternoon, Director Matthews will present a draft operational budget. The expectation is that Council will provide direction at the end of this meeting to staff with regards to the disposition of the budget. Members of Council were provided with copies of the operational budget on Friday, the 21st of April, for review prior to this meeting. Additionally, you have been provided with the PowerPoint this afternoon, so that is on your machines. And during the presentation, members of council are encouraged to ask questions of the CAO or director for clarifications of budget and details. The meeting is being conducted in chambers and is being live streamed. This meeting is called to order. The chair notes that we have quorum. However, Councillor Maxwell has sent regrets due to illness. As this is a special council meeting, there is one agenda item, the 2023-2024 operational budget. If I could have a motion to accept the proposed agenda, please. Thank you. Councillor Huntley? Second. Deputy Mayor, thank you. All those in favor? Those opposed? The motion is carried. Thank you. Director, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I will note that the PowerPoint presentation is in SharePoint, as well as a detailed copy of expenditures and revenues that tie into the summary you received on Friday, and we'll be going through it in detail as the slide deck goes. I wanted to start just to highlight, as I noted in the document provided Friday, that if we look at our vision for sustainability plan within the town of Kentville, you can see that very much what we're trying to do is to invest as well as sustain programs that support our residential and corporate citizens. And this plan really looked at some guiding principles around sustainability, as well as growth, cost effectiveness, and affordability, and trying to balance those together. We created the budget by our service directors looking at what their mandate is for the provision of their service, what kind of requirements do they need to fulfill that mandate, and then how do we resource them, and the financials are the output of that exercise. Our goal was certainly to maintain stable base tax rates overall. I thought it might be helpful for us to really start with the parameters that we use to base our revenues and expenditures on. So beginning with the revenue stream, and we will talk about tax later on in the presentation, but the cap rate, which is CPI driven, that would be assigned to our taxable assessments, went up by 7.7% this year. We've maintained our base tax rates at a static level for 22-23. Most of our other services, as you can see from this slide, we did look at our projections and our 22-23 actual rates and tried to reflect those within the budget. You'll note, and I believe it was asked at CAC around our interest and investment income, we have included an actual for that, so you'll see a large increase when you look at that item later. From a people perspective, we do have a vacancy factor built in, so we know that there are some change positions that have been presented, and those recruitment expectations for those would suggest they won't start at the beginning of the year, so we've incorporated those savings in. We've tried to establish the correct benefit and wage rates based on what we note now. For areas where we are still in the process of negotiating, we've put in a contingency. You will also note that training and learning, those categories have gone up this year. Some of that is to support staff. It's difficult to recruit, and people are in demand as well. We need to make sure that we have people ready for those retirements that will be upcoming given the age of some of our workforce. We've also made assumptions in our expenditures that the impact of COVID is no longer evident when it comes to participation in in-person events, whether it's us going out or whether it's our teams participating. or folks coming into our services to receive services. You'll see some specific inflationary pressures there for travel and insurance rates. The rest were based on CPI or actual experience. I have provided council with those agreements and the joint boards that we have with an estimate for those increases. Our debt level is based on our principal and interest, assuming that our draft capital budget is passed. And our programming is basically at 22-23 levels with some new enhancements that have been identified separately. And from a recreation point of view, thought it was relevant to point out that we are seeing a diminishing ability for people to pay. So you'll note that the costs of our programming is going up. We still have recoveries, but we're not increasing our fees at a rate to match those costs to support affordability philosophy. So those are the assumptions that myself and my colleagues used in developing the budget. So to look at it by program area and type of expenditure, I wanted to start with the areas where we were seeking some FTE change. And you, within the protective service, you will have heard, I believe, over the course of the last year about the crisis navigation position, crisis navigator. That position is in there at full-time this year, and there is no funding, no longer any funding associated with that. So it is showing as a change for that reason. So we are incorporated in the budget is the continued investment in that position. You'll also note that we have in transportation services, we had a position that is currently vacant for a technician, and we would be seeking to refill that position, and we would expect that to happen in around August. So those additional FTE costs that were identified in the schedule sent Friday would be incorporated with these changes. The planning and zoning, that would be another where we were looking at converting the director position to a planner position. So, and the recruitment for that would be delayed. So you'll see overall a net savings in dollars, but a change in the FTE. The new investment is in around the recreation area, and the recreation positions that we were looking to get support for would be a facility supervisor. That person would be in charge of day-to-day operations of our parks and facilities. The community outreach program coordinator, it's really intended to respond to the continued growing need of our community as it relates to recreation opportunities. And as Rachel has shared with me, it's about rethinking some of the existing programming, working with our community to address issues such as food insecurity, and supporting the creation of a neighborhood of communities to help build both individual and community resiliency. That's the intent. We also have incorporated a Homeless No More project coordinator in at point 6. We've also assumed some funding related to that, and we see that position really being supportive of creating and implementing a housing action plan for the town. So those are the main drivers for the people analysis as well as the costs for new wages that you saw in your document on Friday. I've added in the FTE schedule our seasonal staff because I thought it may be relevant for folks to realize that we do have a significant influx of youth employed over in the seasonal way, that if we had them for a whole year, it would be 5 to 6 FTEs. So that's a significant investment. And I will note that in the document that I provided, there was an addition error, but the revised one will be updated. The total FTEs that we had last year would be 72.69. The proposed budget for next year would be 74.15, a change of 1.46. So that is our yes.
Sorry. Councillor York.
Thank you. If you, and perhaps through the chair, sorry, perhaps it's yourself or might be Director Bedingfield, can you clarify, and my apologies, I'm probably a little foggy-headed. The difference between the facilities manager and the facilities oversight, or whatever the terminology was, and I apologize, I can't recall. If that's in addition to
Yeah,
Craig
the
Langell.
facility supervisor in the, yeah.
Okay.
I'll ask Director Bedingfield to answer that question.
Yeah, so, so the traditional facility manager role has been shifted a little bit, so that position has been taken into more of keeping up with the OHS priorities. There's a lot of grant applications, there's a lot of project oversight, there's a lot of sport and economic development opportunities, so really recruiting potential for growth in our community, and that's left a bit of a gap. So then this position is coming in and actually doing the day-to-day operations of what's going on in the park.
Okay, thank you.
It won't shut off. Okay. And I can't turn on another one if that one won't shut off. Yeah.
Fun.
Yeah.
You're not wrong.
Try turning it on again. See what happens. Okay.
Okay, I'm gonna power off.
You know.
Oh, disconnected. Try to reconnect. No, I seem to have lost, we have technical difficulties with the mics.
Oh, it's not just the lights, it's just,
Mics.
yeah.
I said.
yeah, sorry.
Do you want me to turn mine off?
No, I can't
It can't-
turn anything on or off right now.
Yeah.
Just keep proceeding, and once you, we'll send a text out to Jason, see if he, is this something you can do remotely or have to do anything?
I think I can,
When did he last unplug the touchpad?
I don't think he did it today.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's funny, we did it for 2 years, and now it's been complicated. It's good.
Well, Deputy Mayor, go ahead with your question. I realize that you could actually go to the podium to ask it, so that way it's on the record. Or you could yell.
Speak toward Jillian's.
Sorry.
That's all right. So you can hear me okay? Yep. So I had a similar question to Councillor York around the facility supervisor versus the facility manager. So Craig being the facility manager, so his role is more, like you say, OHS, grant applications, project oversights. I'm go back. To get my head around where there's, yeah, okay, where there is an entire new FTE of one person, that being the supervisor. So up until now, Craig has been essentially the facility manager and also the facility supervisor. And so what I'm trying to get my head around is how much growth has there been, or how much growth is anticipated to create one new, completely new position? That's a lot in one question, I know, but yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate the question. You can hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay. So there's actually been someone in this role who's been acting for over a year. So the facility manager position is also shifting, so under a new title. which would become manager of Parks and Recreation. And so Craig has been doing that position for over a year, and then there's been someone who's been acting in the role of supervisor for over a year. So in terms of where we are in our parks, so part of Craig's role when he's come on, that he's been working with me on, is really to get our parks, the park side of the department up to a place where we're actually able to keep up with the current demand. And then also prepare for the growth that we see moving forward in the town. So that's the increase in green space, that's increase in population and users of our green space and trails. Yeah, so this is kind of the work that he's been doing over the past year
Okay.
and a bit. Yeah. So
That
there's
helps.
actually been someone acting in this role already for the full year.
Exactly, so it's
Yeah.
just more formalizing it.
It's just making it official.
Yeah, exactly,
yeah.
okay. I have another question, and it's related to planning and zoning. So, the way that I understand it is that there will be one new position created, that being a director of planning, or something like that. I'm sort of addressing it to you, but I'm seeing a 0.25 decrease, and is that because the director of planning salary was already in the previous year?
I can probably answer that if you'd like.
Go.
So incorporated in that is we're converting the director position to a planner position. So last year in the budget, there was a full-time director. This year in the budget, we've removed the full-time director and replaced that with a full-time planner that we anticipate not starting until the 1st of July. So that's why it's a 0.25 minus, because that would represent 1/4 of the year where it would be unfilled. So and Dan, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the director, that team would then fall under another director.
That's correct. Yeah, and really the reason for the vacancy factor is that if the budget passed today, you still have to advertise, interview, and go through that process. So, so it would be a vacancy factor this year. It won't be a vacancy factor the next year. So at which point then you would have the full 1.0 attached against the position. And so essentially, planning, engineering, public works will roll up under Director Bell. And so that former director position that was there for planning will be gone.
So then may I? So then when we look at that department as a whole, if we looked at it as a whole now, we'd see like Director Bell there, we'd see Kirsten there, we would see another person there, but just one more person.
Correct.
Right, and so there was, so that actually under there's two positions in essence, because you're gonna have a planner.
Yes.
If folks recall, we had an individual last year working for Director Bell on a lot of our active transportation work. He was there for part of a year.
Right.
And so that engineering tech position is also here on the books as being filled. So there was a position that we created, but in this case here, it's here on the books under under Director Bell, and it was a position that was there that wasn't filled for a full year because someone we hired and then they left. And so essentially, we're going to be going back and filling that position this year as well to continue with the active transportation work and with some of the connector proposal that is out there.
So you'll have essentially a 1.5 complement added, because that half complement before was funded by an outside source, was it not?
No, none of those. Well, so what we were able to do with that is there was some ability to utilize funding to a minimum extent. So you're right, there was some outside funding. But we're basically looking at this as, because much of these projects are really it's in-house versus going third-party to
Yes,
consultants.
I understand, yeah.
So essentially it is you're right, it would be the adding essentially of a total of about 1.5 at the
Okay.
end of the day.
Yep, okay, thank you.
Back to you, Director.
Great, thank you. Okay. I did add a slide in that just highlights the external commitments and partnerships that we have and some of the pressure points related to those. You will see those embedded within the program areas. So I thought we could speak to that detail as we look at the detailed document that you also have. But wanted to highlight there are some significant changes in a few of those, areas. Any one that isn't there is because there's been no change or the change has been minimal, in case you're wondering about the missing players. So next, what I'd like to do is look a bit at the revenue and the expenditures. So on your SharePoint site, you will see a summary document, a 25-page document. I know, seems like an oxymoron to say it's a summary, but it is. And it does detail by kind of classification, the types of revenue and the types of expenses within the programs. So I am going to refer you to the page in that document. We'll look at revenue last, if that's okay, and we can start with taking a quick look at page 8 of the operating budget expenditure file. If everyone has that there. So you'll notice that the legislative section is very consistent with where it was last year. There's only one minor change that I thought you might be of interest to you, which is around $5,000, and that is to support interpretive services for council meetings. Page 9 of that document, you will see a fairly significant investment in the general admin area in the expenses. And those items that are identified, some of them are self-explanatory, but wanted to share that advertising and promotion. In particular, there we're seeing increased job postings, and the plan is for public engagement sessions that would require some additional costs associated with those. You'll also may found of interest that convention and travel is up, and that is consistent or below what the travel level was prior to COVID, keeping us at home. So wanted you to be aware of that amount. You'll also notice there's $63,700 or so in IT. There are a couple of big project items there. One being MDR, which is called Managed Detection Response, which is a security team really monitoring against threats and ransomware, so trying to keep us safe. There's also the KPS, the Kentville Police Service Evergreen Plan, which is an approach to replacing all of our workstations, getting everyone at the same technology level and having future scheduled replacements. Anything that's usable will be repurposed or donated, so there is a plan of action around that. And there's also, because of the investment in people that we've identified and changes in maintenance, there's also some increased costs associated with that as well. So those are the big ticket items under admin, and where it was significant, I wanted to make sure that you were aware of those significant changes. If you go to page 12, which is looking at police protection, the operations technology you'll see is another item that is up quite significantly by $32,500. And my colleague may be able to speak to details if needed, but that is, I have acronyms, a GPS, live scan, and Axon. So there are pieces of technology and maintenance for that technology that are driving those costs up a little higher. You'll also note under operations programs, the Community Crisis Navigator is there for the full year salary. So that's where the dollar value related to that FTE is.
We have a question.
Certainly.
Councillor Gerard?
Thank you, Worship. Director, and I asked this question at CAC, is there a way, when I was on Valley Waste, they wanted to start a reserve fund where basically in 10 or 15 years, when a payloader was no good, they had put sufficient funds away.
Right.
Is it feasible for us to think with assessments going up and maybe a little extra money coming into, to the coffers, that over the next 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, we could have that, and we could build up that reserve fund, so that a new payload or, stuff for the police or.
So there are transfers already embedded in here equal to prior year levels, as well as there are items for the police service that were to come from operations that have been identified. And certainly, unless my colleague was to tell me otherwise, because it is month one, there certainly is, with sufficient funds, always an opportunity, I presume, to be able to do such things, unless there is a rule that would suggest otherwise that I'm unaware of. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. I'm now going to draw your attention to page 14, and that is mainly to share that those, that is around fire protection, and our Kentville Volunteer Fire Department area rate has been updated in this budget to reflect the new rate of .0397 per 100. That is there, as well. The transfer that we make for operations has been updated to reflect the actual, so those are up-to-date numbers for them. And the water supply and hydrants has been calculated based on utility review board requirements, so that is why you see a change, but the change is actually going down a bit, but it is based on that actual calculation we're required to do. Moving into transportation services, I did highlight this on the briefing note sent Friday, that many of those costs in transportation as well as road service are related to just general inflationary increases that either we're feeling when we buy goods and services, or some of our vendors are charging us on their contracts. As well, it's important to note that we do have an aging fleet that's requiring more repair, which may come back to us at some point through a capital operating budget. So I thought it was important to identify that operational pressure related to that. Embedded within page 17, you see King's Transit Authority about midway down. That 107,000 is embedded within that category. So you may have noted a large change. That seemed not explained by staffing or expenditures when you saw the summary on Friday. And that, in King's Transit, our percentage is consistent, I believe. And we do have increases for them related to their service delivery that perhaps others are better able to speak to if people have questions. And there is an ask for us to set that aside, as you are aware.
Deputy Mayor?
Thank you, Worship. Through the chair to the director or the CEO. So that 107,000 for King's Transit Authority, I just feel like I need more dispo around that.
Sure.
Okay.
So, two pieces. First of all, last 2 years, there has been funding from different levels of government towards transportation. It's COVID funding. It's all gone. So essentially, there was a funding stream that was backfilling some operational losses. So while ridership was down, a lot of the other expenditures that still happened were being captured. And so that funding is exhausted. Second, as part of the work going forward, the intent is that there would be greater operational and capital reserves for King's Transit. Now, we don't turn that over, we keep that in-house. So there is within that budget for King's Transit, essentially an operational reserve. But from Kentville, what happens is we budget it, but we keep it on our own books as our own reserve.
Right.
So that's why that number is bigger. It's COVID money, and then the essential for that operational piece, that while we budget for it, it will actually be money that will be kept in our bank account until somewhere down the road if it's needed to be expended.
May I? And so further, in the ensuing year, are we expected to see another jump like this in north of 100,000, or?
The biggest piece going forward is the pilot. So right now there is the opportunity to apply for new buses. So part of what's happening is the pilot right now is they're looking at what should that composition be. So one of the drivers right now is we have a lot of old buses with a lot of high miles. So once you do get into those new buses, and it's a very large funding envelope you get from the federal provincial government on that, while there could be some debt you might incur as an entity, you should see a lot of those high mileage expenses disappear. And second, the question becomes, and this gets into that piece around, are you gonna continue to use fossil fuels or electrify the fleet? You might also see some changes with regards to the fuel costs going forward. So the short answer is, we're not 100% sure till that work is completed. But at this moment in time, one of the biggest expenses keeping these older buses on the road that have high mileage. Assuming we go down the road of putting the appropriate size newer buses in place, some of those expenses should come down.
Okay, thank you.
Additionally, if I may, King's Transit buys fuel from the province.
Yeah.
And that's at a good rate, we'll say. They were $222,000 over budget for fuel
Yeah.
in last year. And as you well know, we can't carry a deficit, so all of that rolls
Yeah.
forward. Now,
Okay.
Kentville's share of King's Transit Authority is still 10.1%.
Yeah.
And so when you look at these costs, and as well, they've put that $600,000 for fuel into the new budget. So that's really what we're seeing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, thank you.
All right, Councillor Gerard.
Thank you, Worship. Just a question in regards to when we bring up King's Transit and when we bring up Valley Waste and stuff like that. I just wonder, both you folks are on the service agreement. And I've been going on about this for 7 years, so let me rant and then that'll be good. But is there a better formula than, assessment and population to do some of this stuff? Like, what about, so for example, you look at what Valley Waste is gonna increase to in 2024. We're gonna have more people, hopefully McDougall Heights and other places in town, and that's from me to you away, a stop here, a stop there. When you looked at Cottage Country, and the grain bins going, that was a $270,000 increase that we were responsible 7.95 or whatever percent. I don't think the taxpayer's getting the best bang for their buck when we've got 17 square kilometers and, we pay the same rate as, no offense to anybody that lives, on either far side of the county, but it costs a lot more to get there.
So, so first of all, MNP, which is an accounting firm who's been engaged in this, and getting those costs, kind of at the driveway is part of the work that's going on. In addition to that, they're also looking at the costs that are happening at the facility. So if you have a very traditional roll-on, roll-off kind of process with trucks, is there something you can do that's more efficient and might save you some money and improve safety, because that's the other element. And so all of that is on the table to look at how do you shrink any overall, costs with kind of new processes. The other piece I will say it's also about is there lines of business here that you're doing something one way and maybe you should be into some other business that will help generate revenue to support some of those expenditures, whatever that might be. And so I think it's all of those pieces put together are gonna put a package on the table that talks about specific costs, who pays. It's gonna talk about, are there things right now we're doing at the facility we could be better? And then is there certain lines of business we're not in now and you're kind of going, why not? And so when you kind of look at those pieces together, the intent would be long-term sustainability, but then who specifically pays for what? So that's all on the table.
And I understand that, but my fear of, here's another line of revenue, is you look at all these things and you go, right, there's revenue to the bus system, there's revenue to Valley Waste, but at the end of the day, we don't charge what it costs, and everybody ends up subsidizing. So saying, here's another line of revenue, you go, how much more subsidy is this gonna cost the town?
Yep,
Thank
fair
you.
enough.
Councillor York.
Thank you, through the chair if I might. What is the pilot project doing to address like ridership and routes? New buses are obviously needed, but if more people aren't riding them, we're not gonna get any revenue to offset the cost of the new buses to begin with.
So first of all, the route itself is where they're driving and the size of the bus appropriate for what you should be doing. So there's work around that. In addition, this gets you into that question of, if you do change the fuel source, is it capable of these buses running those? Because at a certain point in time, you've got to stop if you're gonna go electric and recharge it. So if that source is not there, well, then you can't put a route there and so on. So there's that element. There's certainly a piece where they're talking around the marketing of what we have. And what I say by that is that while some of this is about image, some of this is about those future growth sites. So we have pockets where we know there's going to be extensive growth, then you're building into your plan essentially either how you get folks from that place to a key transportation node, or you're going to be taking the bus to where the folks are in order to pick them up. They have discovered there's a number of routes right now that are heavily used consistently. So obviously there's something there they're doing right. But then as we know, and everybody has the time when they look at a bus and they see, driving by at a certain point, and maybe it's less than capacity. So some of that is saying, okay, if there is a demand and what we're using for a bus is inappropriate, maybe that's part of the problem. But also some of this might be, and we've talked a little bit of this, I know at the accessibility table, is that some of the things are offered are just not that attractive to people who have different needs. And so again, looking at the fleet, what are we going to bring in to make sure we meet those needs, I think helps as part of that conversation as well.
Thank you. And based on our last IMSA meeting, the levels of ridership are coming up to our pre-COVID levels. And from a cost perspective, it's about $11 a ride in actual cost versus the cost of a ticket of getting on King's Transit. Back to you, Director.
Great. I'll draw your attention to page 20. And in page 20, you will see a planning study included within planning and zoning, and that is for $50,000, and that relates to the secondary planning that was discussed at a previous CAC discussion. So that is embedded within the budget for your awareness. Environmental development on page 21. You'll see a few increases there, and that relates to some expansion in some programming, an entrepreneurship program, as well as increases in the visitor center. So that is the community development side. On page 22, in recreation, you will note professional fees there of another $50,000, and that is the facilities, this planning and study around facilities as well as accessibility. So those are incorporated in there as well, based on previous discussions. Page 23 and 24 speak to recreation programs and facilities, and that ties back to that planning assumption around trying to maintain affordability for those people that are coming in to receive services from us. As well, you will notice on page 23, there is a value in there for the Canada Cup. So there is a contribution that we're making to participate in that national event. And that is embedded in that document as well. And that, I believe, brings us to the last page, 25, which is our school board contribution. And just wanted to share that our rate for that is 0.0030408 specific. Our student population actually has gone up, our percentage from 9.93 rounded to 10.27. So our number of students have risen and our percentage has risen, and that has contributed to that increase in our contribution. So those are the details around the expenditures. If there are no further questions.
Deputy Mayor?
Okay.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll probably direct this to CEO Troke, I think, just because it's around the planning studies, the 50,000, the secondary plan. And I know that we have talked about a secondary plan in CAC, but do you want to give us a little bit more information around what that looks like?
Sure, absolutely. So it would be a third party who would be leading some of this. Now, the design around the consultation and the engagement would be heavily connected to what staff here at Town Hall do. But part of what you want to come out of that is essentially you're creating a piece that could be an appendix to our existing MPS and LUB. So specifically for those R5 large lot pieces of property that could be developed. And so think about, there's a conversation around, do you want and where would you want space if a school was going to be built? Where are the appropriate places for you to think about, smaller scale commercial to support activities? Also thinking about, is there space for things like water management, community space, and so on incorporated into it? We know that there's going to be an element of active transportation, whatever we do. So some of those kind of preliminary thoughts around, if you have hundreds of acres that are going to be developed, is there some places there where we as a municipal unit might have some interest in way ahead of the game partnering to say, here's some spaces that we want for trails, that we want for other kinds of activity. And so that's essentially the idea that it would be a comprehensive enough document that would speak to the pieces around, particularly the R5 lots, and kind of drilling down on that vision even farther than what we have today in our own MPS, but adding those layers of some of those other elements that are important for planning for recreation, important for planning for public works, around those other things that then we can build into the model as we see development agreements come forward, as we see rezoning applications come forward and whatnot.
Because right now, the town of Kentville would probably have in excess of 700 or so acres that would be part of that secondary planning strategy that doesn't have the infrastructure in place, et cetera, and underground and, okay. So that will be really important. Yeah, okay, thank you.
Director?
Okay. So, all of the revenues, other than taxes that that are identified on the summary sheet provided on Friday, are really reflective of our planning assumptions. So I'm not going to talk about those in detail unless you have questions, but really wanted to talk about the taxes. So for your information, residential tax information that was provided by, I'm going to get the name wrong, Property Valuation Limited? Services Limited. The information that was provided by them on December the 8th. So it's their sort of year end for 2022 that we use for 2023 roll. So the taxable assessment level for residential resource grew by 14.96%. Last year it went up by 10.5%. The provincial cap rate is set at CPI at a certain point through the year. That this year is 7.7%. Last year it was 5.4%. Our capped assessments, looking at our overall assessable properties and then those that are capped, represents 77.2% of total properties. Last year it was 67.5%. So, of course, our new revenue dollars that we've identified in our budget are derived either from a combination or from assessment growth, new construction, or property sales. So what I have done is I calculated, with help from the team, the residential base rate remaining stable so that you can see is one 0.4262 last year, remaining at the same rate this year. But as I spoke, our fire area rate has changed. So you can see that those numbers, as I mentioned, the 0.0378 going to 0.0397. Our hydrant area rate, as identified, that calculation, that dollar value went down. So that means that our percentage or our fee required over that increased assessment value is 0.0588. Our economic development levy stays the same, which will bring our overall rate from 1.537 to 1.5262. So a decrease of 0.0108 related to those rates that we then move forward. So a decrease of about 0.7. I then thought, how does that affect our residential tax bills? So looking at it for 2022, if you had 100,000, because it's easier the math, it would be a bill of 1537. This year, if you fit within that cap assessment, it would be 1644. I thought council might find it interesting to know, if we look at the information provided, last year, our average taxable assessed value for a residential property was $199,673, which would mean the taxpayer will receive a bill of $3,069. This year, our average taxable assessed value is $224,079. So the bill would be $34.20. So just to give you a sense of what that average bill would be based on services number.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Worship. I probably should know this, but I really don't. Why is the hydrant air, not that I have any problem with.
With it going down? I
Let
asked
me
this-
be clear.
I asked
Why
myself
is
the
the
same-
hydrant area rate going down? I thought
I
it was
asked
gonna go
myself the same question this morning.
Okay.
So there is a calculation that's done through URB. So we've calculated that rate. Remember, our assessed values have gone up, so we have more to distribute against as well.
Ah.
So there's multiple factors that influence that
Okay.
calculation.
Okay.
We did validate through that this morning. We can certainly run the numbers again.
No,
but
no,
that is
that's
where
okay.
it turned out
Yes,
to be,
please do.
because the total that we require is less than it was last year.
Okay.
And we have so because we require less, we apply that over the full assessed value, and it brings the rate down.
That's great. Awesome. Thank you.
That's the math. Yep.
Councillor Zabian.
Thank you. Just to remind me, 1 cent of our dollars gives us, what, 60,000 in residential? Around there, is that the number roughly?
That's a number I did not calculate.
Okay.
But
I think, if I remember, and I could be wrong, it's around there.
Sounds right. I know it was
Yeah.
50-some thousand, but let's round it to 60.
Okay,
Yep.
and I think
Okay.
commercial, 1 cent of commercial is around 7,000 or 8,000.
Okay.
If I remember. I just have to throw this out here because, I think as a council, we should possibly look at reducing our tax rates. We've got, what was it, around 1.3 million or 1.4 million extra that we wouldn't have gotten if the assessments hadn't gone up. And I know costs are escalating, and I understand
Yeah.
that, but costs are escalating for everybody. And I think we really should, and maybe we're a little rushed tonight because we didn't get this package until like 20 minutes before the meeting. Maybe we should table it if anyone would like to, or I think we should look at a reduction because we could easily reduce it. Just let me do some quick math. I mean, 10 cents is going to take it down to 600,000, and that's half of, yeah, that would be 5 cents, sorry, would take us down. I don't have my calculator. Anyway, half of, I think we should. I know I have been following some other towns and some have been able to do that. I can't not ask the question because I know citizens are hoping that we will at least look at that. And again, that's money that we weren't planning to get, I guess. So I see how it's been built into the budget and I can appreciate the time and energy, but what if we didn't get it? The costs are still gonna go up, as everybody else's costs are going up too. So that's where my head is right now. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Director? Did you have?
sure, I can go through the last slide.
Okay, please.
Which just provides us with the commercial calculation. So the commercial taxable assessments have increased by 9.98%, as you can see, compared to last year at 3.6. We have maintained the commercial base rate at the same rate as last year, and We have adjusted the fire and the hydrant rate the same, and therefore the overall change is from 3.5142 to 3.5034, or a reduction of 0.31%. That translates into the $100,000 assessment value, a bill of 34,514 going to 3503. So a very insignificant difference there. Okay. And that is the end of the formal portion of my slides. I do want to say that I have been here about a month, and this couldn't have happened without the help of my colleagues who are sitting in the back of the room, the directors and the chief, as well as the finance team, and Dan and Jennifer have been fabulous to help pull this together. So I hope that it was able to address a lot of the questions that you might have had, but if you have additional questions, happy to take something away and provide more detail at a later time.
All right, thank you very much, Director, and to staff. Thank you for your contribution to this budget. You've given us a balanced budget, and for that we appreciate it. As council knows, and as I put out to our citizens, municipal entities are not permitted to operate in a deficit position, and so therefore having a balanced budget is very important. So we do have a recommendation to approve this budget, and as such, I would like to put a motion on the table to get the conversation started. Councillor Zabian has weighed in with his position, and so we can get the conversation started. So the motion would be that council approve the 2023-2024 Town of Kentville operational budget in the amount of $15,924,000, and further that there is no tax rate increase. The residential rate will be 1.5262 cents, and the commercial rate is 3.5034. And if someone could move that, please. Deputy Mayor, thank you. Councillor Huntley for the second, thank you. It has been moved and seconded that council approve the 2023-2024 Town of Kentville operational budget in the amount of $15,924,200. Did I say that the first time? Okay. It's 15 million, okay, now I'm never gonna get it right. 15,924,200, and that's on our proposed revenue page. And further that the taxes, the residential rate is 1.5262, and the commercial rate is 3.5034, and open for discussion. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have two comments. My first one would just be to thank the new director for presenting us with an operating budget. It's not an easy task, and you've been here for 4 weeks, and that's quite a feat, so thank you for that. I think secondly, it's important to note, to Councillor Zabian's point, we do have that lift in the assessment income, the 1.3, a little north of 1.3 million. But at the same time, we look at the crisis navigator position, we look at, the position in planning, plus we look at the increased position under recreation. I think there's a lot of great things, and to Director Matthews' point around being poised for growth and accommodating, our citizens now and what their needs are, and, moving forward on a recreation basis, people that, do not necessarily have the funds to access those services, them being in a better position to do so. I like the budget. I think it's very, very well laid out, and I feel comfortable having all my questions answered this evening. So I'll be supporting it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Zabian.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks to the staff for putting this together. They did a great job. And I'm just gonna be redundant very quickly. I won't spiel again, but we've got a lift of 1.3 million of tax revenue this year because of the assessments, and I just can't support that. I think we could trim the budget a little bit to give back to the citizens a little bit, because we've all been affected. So, like I said, I know the town's got higher costs, but everybody else does. So I think we should strongly look at reducing the residential tax rate before we approve this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor York.
Thank you. Speaking for just myself, I got some clarification this evening, which has been helpful, but I would like to take a little bit more time with it. It's a lot of money, and I recognize that it's my job and it's always a lot of money, but I'm not quite comfortable yet voting on this. I appreciate the amount of work that goes into it to get it to this point, and I don't want to rush my decision. Full stop. And I just would like to sit with it. I feel like I will have more questions by the end of even this week. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gerard.
Thank you, Worship. Several years back, you and I attended an asset management with Bentley, I believe was her last name. She was a mayor out west. She was heavy into asset management, and she said, if you don't raise your tax rate every year, you know, you're gonna fall behind. I understand what she's saying. I don't necessarily agree with that sentiment, especially in some of the times that we live in now. But essentially, by the hydrant rate lowering, our rate did go down. I can't agree on lowering the tax rate. You know, when these lifts happen, you have to, you know, we're the stewards of the tax dollars, and you know, we have to be responsible to spend it wisely. But if you get into a habit or you know, of lowering tax rates, we've seen towns over the last 20 years where, you know, they've had to lift their tax rate 10 cents. You know, in order to cover budget. So I certainly don't agree that we lower it. I do like the budget, and I would be prepared to vote on it tonight, but if others need more time, that's absolutely okay with me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gerard. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Worship. You know, it is a big number, to Councillor York's point, and I mean, if the consensus is, you know, to spend a little bit more time on it, and because I think the idea was to recommend it to council, to pass it at council this evening, was it not?
This is a special meeting, so we can pass it at this meeting. We don't have to wait till the council meeting, because this is a special meeting of council, so therefore we have authority to pass this budget at this meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Zabian.
Thank you. I would second the request of Councillor York, if we can table it to get more information. Like I said, we got this at, I think, 4:20, or no, 4:40 rather, 4:35, and the meeting was at 5, so that's too much for me to absorb in one day. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And just as a clarification, it was not to get more information, it was just to have more time with the current package.
Well, there's a lot of information there that we didn't get until 4:35.
Yes,
See
yes.
it broken down, and I can appreciate the time it takes, but I'm not comfortable making a decision without having time to kind of go through it, so,
Okay,
thank you.
thank you. And to your point, Councillor Gerard, Christina Bentley, her statement was that your revenues needed a lift of at least 4% per year, such that you could manage your infrastructure costs alone. So if you look at this budget, you know, there's almost $1 million of things that we have no control over. You know, if you look at that first page on the document that we were provided with over the weekend. So $1.4 million goes away pretty fast when you've got $1 million that we don't have control over its expenditure. So having said that, right now, we do have a motion on the table. And we do have concerns to look at the data that we have been presented, and it is recognized that the data was only presented this evening, prior to this meeting. So if we could agree that we take the data that we have away, and however it would necessitate another another meeting of council, because otherwise we're holding this off until the end of May, which would be our next council meeting, which doesn't make much sense. So if you had 4 days, 4 days to look at this, if we came back next Monday, would that work for everyone? So if we laid this on the table, and I'm asking this by consent as opposed to with a formal motion, to take away the package that you have been given, and then come back on next Monday, is that feasible? Does anyone object to laying this on the table and bringing it back next Monday, giving you enough time to look at the documents that you've been provided? All right, Deputy Mayor, you had something?
Yep, and this is my last time, because it's my third time. I think it's important also, whether it's Director Matthews or whether it's CEO Trope, excuse me, to comment on what percentage of this budget is actually discretionary. I think that's an important number. I know that the part that's discretionary is pretty low. I seem to think it's about 13% discretionary, but maybe it's a little bit less or a little bit more. But I think that's an important note. Thank you.
I'm not sure that I can
No.
answer that question right now.
Right, and so that's
Yeah.
exactly what I was gonna say. Happy
Yeah.
to do a quick calculation on it, we'll send an email out to council with
Yeah.
that.
All right, so council, we have laid our motion on the table. We will meet again next Monday, which is
May 1st.
May 1st. Okay, May 1st, and can we meet at 4 PM? 4 PM, Monday, May 1st? Deputy Mayor? I just saw you had that look.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's okay. Yes, that's fine.
That works? Okay, so our budget meeting is adjourned as we have completed all of the business, and the time is 6:02. Thank you very much. We'll take a very quick break as we're moving into to the council meeting, so top up your water, do your biological stuff, and we'll meet back here at 6:10.